everybody. Welcome to our New Ideas, New Approaches Zoom from the National Grange. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Philip Veneta. I am the National Grange Communications Director, and it's so great to see such a full Zoom room tonight for what's going to be a delightful and engaging topic that so many of our Granges need to hear. Tonight we are joined by Beth Westbrook, who I'm going to give you a brief bio on Beth. That says, after nearly 20 years working in the oncology field, Beth joined the Vasculitis Foundation as the Director of Development in the summer of 2018. Now the Senior Director of Outreach, Beth is also responsible for public policy initiatives in the rare autoimmune disease space. She's a passionate patient advocate and dedicated fundraiser. Over the years, she's testified before Congress, served as the keynote speaker for issues involving healthcare for children, and worked on black tie galas widely attended by members of Congress, ambassadors, healthcare influencers, and successful business people. She currently lives in Fort Valley, Virginia, which is rural Virginia. In 2015, she worked for the Shenandoah Community Healthcare Clinic, serving the needs of rural low-income residents. And she now uses her spare time to participate as a committee member for the Shenandoah County Library's Capital Campaign, as well as a board member of Theater Shenandoah and a member of the board of directors of Grange Advocacy. We did ask everybody to pre-register tonight and said that everybody who registered and showed up for the Zoom may get a free gift. And Nona just texted me and asked me to tell you that your free gift from us is going to be a $5 Dunkin' gift card that will be delivered to your inbox in the coming weeks. Please also email me your mailing address if you believe that it will not show up in your inbox. So my email address will show up here at the end of the night. I'll also drop it in the chat. Please keep your microphones off tonight until we ask you to turn them on. With so many people in a full Zoom room, it's hard to keep track and make sure that the right person's talking at the right time. And there will be plenty of time for Q&A, so feel free to drop it in the chat or wait to ask your question out loud whenever we get there. So without any further housekeeping, I'd like to introduce you all to Beth Westbrook.
Well, thank you, Phil. I almost wanted to stop and say, who is that woman, the way you described me? But I really do appreciate the kind words you said and for the invitation to be here. Chris and Nona, you were also instrumental in inviting me here. I have notes tonight because one of the things you will quickly learn is I love to talk. And I want to make sure I can cover as much as I can and still leave you with time to ask questions and get to know different ways to fundraise. And I want to apologize that you had false advertising in the ad to join this webinar. I like to say this gray hair is a result of all my years of fundraising. So you got to see the pre-pandemic picture. This is post-pandemic. I want to start out by saying how much your work means to me. I've lived in Sedalia, Missouri, Capac, Michigan, and now Fort Valley, Virginia. All of these are small rural communities, and they are very important to me because not only because of the things they can do, but because of the people who live there. So when I was asked recently to join the Grange, it was such an honor to be able to once again give back to the communities who do so much. So whatever talents or lessons I've learned, I want to share with you to help make you stronger in what you do. So let's agree right from the start, this is a conversation, not a lecture. I have no slides because I want to be able to go back and forth. If you remember nothing else from tonight, my email is beth.westbrook.cnps, and I'll say that again at the end, @gmail.com. And the CNPS stands for Collaborative Nonprofit Strategy. And I joined with a bunch of other colleagues in fundraising to create these email addresses for people to reach out with questions. So at any time, you can reach out and ask me or share with me a particular challenge you may have, and I'll be happy to talk you through it and give you some ideas. So whatever we don't cover tonight is just an ongoing conversation. My goals tonight, in addition to the conversation, is to just share some of the basics, some of the lessons I've learned, and to hear from you as to what's important and what are some of the challenges you're having with the work that you're trying to do. And so we'll start out by just talking about some of the basics of fundraising. We'll do a little bit of like case studies, like how did Beth handle this situation? And then some of the things you can be doing beyond whatever the project or the event you're working on now. So let's begin. Or better yet, how do I begin? And that's with goals and planning. I cannot stress this enough, goals and planning. You already have the passion. You wouldn't be here tonight if you were not passionate about your community and wanting to find ways to enhance that. I always tell people that people give to people. They don't give to projects or events. They want to know that they're improving someone else's life. So when I first started, I thought, I was too embarrassed to ask for money. I thought I was asking like for something that benefited Beth Westbrook. But once I took that lens and I twisted it a little bit to just asking them to share in my passion and to join me in making a difference, things were easier. I really started to feel more confident in my own skin in asking for someone to help me. Before I go further, there are really four buckets to fundraising, four big buckets to fundraising. And the first one is individuals, whether they're a small donor, a large donor, a volunteer of their time or resources. You are really looking at that individual gift, which is different than companies or corporations, which you may be sitting across the table from someone, but you're really asking their company or their organization to give. And don't forget, when I say organizations, sometimes that means like the local chapter of the American Medical Association or your local PTA, or it could even be another service organization. But we categorize that because we're not asking that person to give us money. We're asking for a gift from the organization or company they represent. The third big bucket is events. And we've all been around events. And I can tell you good stories about my events, and I could tell you more horror stories about my events. I think there's more horror stories than good stories, but I will save that if we have time. And then the fourth bucket would be grants. And I don't know how many of you write grants or write requests for support, but that's really an area where you really have to use your writing skills, and they tend to involve more details. You would have to submit more details. Any one of these four buckets, we can do a webinar on, and I'd be happy to, or I'd happy to secure somebody who has the expertise in any one of these areas to come and talk to you about that specific one. But tonight I'm going to be more broad and more general and more inclusive to what you're planning. So when we talk about goals, the most important thing you can do is come up with a 1 or 2 sentence statements about what it is you're trying to accomplish. So that no matter who you run into, even if they're asking you, what is it that you're doing now? You want to be as concise and as succinct as possible so that they pay attention and don't walk away. So here are some examples. Let's start with this one. Our goal is to raise $1,000 to enhance programs for healthy activities for children in our community. Our first goal is to rebuild the play swing set in the park. I've stated up front in the first sentence what my dollar goal is. And then in my second sentence, I was very specific in what that first step would be. And in that, whoever's listening to me has heard those two things right up front. And that can begin the dialogue. I always like to say, and I had lunch with Chris recently, she says, I want to be prepared when someone comes up to me and says, I have $1 million. What do you want to do with it? You need a goal and a first step. And that's the beginning of the conversation. And then think about planning. Who are the people? What are the tools that you're going to need to whether it's to ask somebody for money or to create an event or to think about a relationship with a local business or company. But what are those things I'm going to need? In most cases, it's a budget. It doesn't have to be down to the penny, but to know the things that you're going to have to cover in order to deliver this. The next helpful tool is a timeline. And this is where I always got into trouble. I never made timelines, and then I'm scrunching everything in the last week to try to get it done. And then I'm frustrated and I feel defeated because I've run out of time. Once I disciplined myself to making that timeline and getting people to help me, which is the next thing, no one can do it by themselves. I'd like to think I'm Superwoman, but so far nobody has given me the costume. So I tell you, never try to do it on your own. Get people to help you. It will make it so much easier in the long run. And then one more thing I would ask you to think about as you develop your ideas is think about what you're going to do after you get that donation, after you get that support. Because just getting that donation or support is not the end of the relationship, especially if this is something you're going to want to do again somewhere down the road. So you have to remember that thank you notes, keeping in touch throughout the year, those really matter when you go around and ask again. I always think of, like, I had a wonderful aunt, and when I would go to ask her to support a project, she would be like, the only time you call me is when you want money. And I think, but you're my aunt. You should be easy. It's not always easy when you come once at a time. One of the things that I've had to develop is thinking big. I've always been so focused on just getting whatever it is done. I think about the times that I've thought about what's right in front of me, and I needed to raise a certain amount of money. And I wasn't taking a moment to step back and say, is this really part of something bigger, a bigger project? Because I've learned that when you think big, people will think big with you. As long, and it goes back to that goal and the specific thing. You may have a goal to enhance healthy activities for children. The idea of a swing set is just one part of that. But by stepping back and thinking of the larger picture, when you're having a discussion, that will really help. It's so wonderful when you know that there are people out there willing to support you, and you're doing all the hard work to raise the money. Make those hours count. And I promise you, if you just step back and think big, the hours you put in will just be that much, put you that much further ahead in the things that you want to accomplish. You know, I like to tell this story at this point. When I first was at Children's Hospital in Pittsburgh, I was there because back in 1999, my daughter Katie was diagnosed with cancer. And the hospital, at that point, I was a special ed teacher, middle school. And I thought the only thing I know how to do is raise money selling candy bars and wrapping paper. Oh, yes. And I also was really good in supporting Girl Scout cookie sales. But when it came to the larger picture, I didn't. And my then soon to be boss said, look, we'll teach you what to do. So my first outing was we were going to have a fundraiser for children's oncology. And I was sent to go talk to the division head of a large corporation about supporting this project. And the project was to, and this will tell you how old I am, but it was to get VCRs in every room at Children's Hospital for children. And this particular time, I was coming in wanting to raise money for more children activities. I wanted to raise $1 million for children's activities. And my goal was to get Mr. Kennedy to have his company donate $10,000 towards getting VCRs in every hospital room. So I went there. I knew Mr. Kennedy's son had had the same type of cancer as Katie. I thought, boom, this one's going to be easy. This is a slam dunk. And as I sat across from Mr. Kennedy, he told me no, that he could not support this endeavor, that he was so proud of everything that we did at the hospital and incredibly grateful for what the hospital had done for his son, but he could not support this endeavor. Well, I have to tell you, I was like a deer in headlights. I didn't even know what to say to him at this point. All I wanted to do was get up, shake his hand, thank him very much for his time, and get out of there. But my boss, Gail, said, Mr. Kennedy, can I ask you a couple of questions? He said, sure, go ahead. She said, well, I just want to understand, when you said no, was it because we asked for too much money? Or could it even have been this isn't a good time in your budget cycle for you to make a gift? And he said, you know, Gail, that's exactly it. I have exhausted the money in my budget for community endeavors. He said, I really wished I could help you. He said, you know, Beth, if you can come back early next year, January or February, let's talk about what you're working on and how we can help you. Maybe not only could we make a gift, but we could get some of our employees to help in some of the volunteering that you need done. And so instead of just shaking his hand and walking out of there, we have started a relationship. And I just want to go one step further to say 2 weeks later, Mr. Kennedy and his wife made a gift, a personal gift of $10,000 to the hospital for VCRs in each room. So the point of my story is sometimes you're going to hear no. And it's going to be frightening and you're going to feel bad and you're going to wonder, what do I do next? And if you do nothing more, then remember those 2 questions. Was it the amount of money? Was it the timing of my ask? It could be the beginning of continuing the conversation. And maybe it isn't what you need right in the moment, but it could end up being so much more when you think big the next time. So I hope you'll keep that in mind as you go out there and seek gifts. You know what? I think at this point I'm going to stop. I haven't been paying attention, but do we have any questions at this point, Phil?
There's nothing in the chat yet, but I did have one emailed to me ahead of time that
Sure.
says, we are a new Grange in a rural community. Is there anything different that new Granges need to do in a community where the community doesn't yet know what the Grange is so we can be successful at fundraising?
Yeah, that to me, I enjoy that part, Phil, because a lot of times it's just reaching out and asking if you can talk about it, talk about what's new in your life, what's new in the community. They may not be aware of it. And so just getting on their radar is the beginning of that conversation. And I've been creative at times, Phil. Sometimes it isn't the head of a company that I go to. I may go to their HR department and say, do you ever allow people to come in and have what we call as a lunch and learn, an opportunity to talk about what we're working on and what we're passionate about? Sometimes companies will even have where they allow different organizations in the community to come in and have a table and just talk about what they're doing. But it's the beginning of the conversation. And I would always encourage you when you're doing this is to have information available, sort of a ways to give, and not just financially, but volunteering. Volunteers tend to be one of the most generous donors there is because they're buying into the mission, because they're volunteering. And when it comes to family, friends, neighbors, and colleagues, we all sit around and talk about what's going on in our lives. And including the Grange in that discussion is, again, the first step to beginning the conversation. So I hope that helps answer that question.
I think so. Does anyone else have any
Any
questions?
other questions?
Heidi Borneman just posted in the chat and said, how do you find grants?
Heidi, that's a great question because there's really several ways you can go about doing that. For instance, here in Shenandoah County, we have a community foundation, which is a foundation set up to do grants and work with community organizations to help build programming. In many respects, it's made up of large donors or family trusts, but they come together. The nice thing I will say about community foundations, if you have one in your area, they hold workshops to learn how to write successful grants long before they ask you to apply for a grant. And so you not only get to learn how to do it, but then you get to do it really well. And they understand where you're coming from. The other thing I use quite often is just getting online. I look around and I see, in the case of companies and stuff, who on their website has a community outreach portion on their website. And within that, quite often you can get ways to access grants, a sponsorship for an event, to solicit volunteers from the company. That's another way. Once you get a little more up there are also sites on the websites, things like the Foundation Center and GuideStar and Charity Navigator, which will also help you direct you towards grants. As you go each step of the way, you get to a wider access of what is out there. Most recently, I was working on the library capital campaign, and I realized that the energy company down here, even though it isn't based in Shenandoah County, they have where they give out up to $25,000 a year for projects in the community. So again, sometimes it's just thinking outside of the box and where to apply. And again, these are all great ideas where if you have a nugget, reach out to me. We can brainstorm ways in your area to reach out and find out who has avenues for you to submit.
Beth, I had another question that was texted to me that said,
Yeah,
the Grange is not, most Granges are not 501c3s, but are 501c8s or 501c10s.
That's
How
gotta
can
be
we
right.
overcome that with funders? And then are there things that we can do to ensure that our donors can still
Fourth is
document the
fun.
donations as charitable activities?
would you say that last part again, Phil? I didn't hear it.
Yeah, because we're not a 501c3, are there specific steps that we should take to ensure our donors can still document donations as going to a charitable activity?
So the general rule with the IRS is any gift under $250, it is the responsibility of the donor to prove that they've given to a charitable organization. And so quite often people will use, they'll use a thank you letter. They may, I will hold aside like raffle tickets or tickets to events because that is a whole different thing, but I'll be happy to talk about that. But once you get above $250 in a donation, the IRS requires that in order to recognize it as a donation, it is from a 501c3 and that you get acknowledged for the exact amount. Where you can work through this within the Grange is I have been part of organizations where you're right. At that local level, you don't carry the individual 501c3, but you are part of an umbrella organization that oversees your activities. If they carry the 501c3, and if the donation is $250 or more, they could write the acknowledgement that would be accurate for the IRS. And Phil, did I cover everything on that question?
I think so. I want to tag a little follow-up onto that.
Sure.
I've heard some people directing their donations through their state Grange Foundation for their Grange so that the foundation, which is the 501c3, can document the receipt. Are you saying that it can go to a local Grange hall, a local Grange, but still the foundation can write the letter on their behalf? Is that what you're suggesting? Or does the donation still need to go through the foundation first?
So, what you're asking me, let's role play here for a second, Phil. You would like to make a donation to my local Grange, and you would like to make a donation of, I'm going to be really good here. You want to give me $1 million for my projects. What I would do is I would accept the gift. Well, first I'd call the foundation and let them know they're about to get $1 million funneled through. But I would accept the gift, but it would be processed through the foundation or the 501c3 or the 501c4. That's Phil, where your receipt for taxes will come from, but it still is a gift to the local Grange. And depending on how things are set up in terms of your relationship between the foundation and the Grange, that gift should come back to the local because it was the intent of the donor for that to stay local. And in addition, the local Grange can write a thank you note, and they should write a thank you note so that you, Phil, know that you are appreciated, but that note will not have the official tax language in it. It'll come from the higher entity. Did that help?
That helps, yes. I think some people would want to give their donation directly to the Grange and not realize, they have to go kind of the roundabout route. And some of the Granges that are on might not realize that either, that they need to work with their foundation in order for that to happen. So I just wanted clarification on that.
Yes, yes. And again, Phil, without knowing all the particulars within the Grange, there could be additional layers here that I don't know about that would have to be discussed. But I know in general terms and in my experience, that's the cycle that the donation would go through. Once I know that I've received a gift, $250 or above.
Great. Another question that was dropped in the chat, actually, it looks like it was sent directly to me, says, how do you determine a point of contact at a company or business when looking for a sponsorship?
That's a great question. That's one of those $64 million questions. I generally, well, I always start within the organization, asking if anybody knows of anybody within the company. They may not be the person to ask for support, but if they know someone within the company, they could be your messenger. You know, explain what it is you want, who you're looking forward to talking with, and they could possibly direct you. They may not make the introduction, they may not be the ultimate person, but they may be the person within the company or organization that could find that out for you. If I have nobody, if we have a new business here and it's a large business, then I always start in their HR department. I just make a call. Couple of things. A lot of times HR departments will pick up your call where others won't, or at least direct you. And sometimes I just go in by telling them who I am, what I'm passionate about, and asking if they know about the organization. Could I come talk to them? Because once you get in the door and you've made that relationship, the next step is you can have a conversation about some of the things they can work with together with you.
Great. There's still a little bit of
And
conversation.
and by the way, Phil, I want to just talk about the power of the cookie. I'm going to write a book someday about the power of the cookie.
Copyright
so for
that.
local businesses that I want to get to know and work with, I take cookies to them. Number one, they seem to love the idea of getting cookies. They remember me, and I've already developed a positive relationship to come back and ask for help. So don't give up. It doesn't really have to be a cookie, but don't give up on the idea of the power of the cookie.
Okay, so Diana Echevarria commented in the chat, and she just added some company keywords to think about include community involvement, about us, send an email to one of the departments like businesses. And then Phil Prelli, who was formerly on our National Grange Board of Directors, said the first step when working with state or National Grange foundations is to talk to them on the steps to take. So there's still some chat happening about the foundations in the chat, which is great. It was a great thing to get rolling. But that's all that's hanging in the chat for now. So
okay. Well, let me get back. Now I wanna go through 3 scenarios where somebody, let me think. You know what I wanna do? I wanna go back and talk about thinking big, because I think sometimes that's the piece where most people come to me and say, Beth, I'm stuck. You know, here's a prime example. Let's say every year I set a personal goal that I want to raise $1,000 for my local Grange. I've done a bake sale. I've taken out a booth at the county fair and done a ducky draw. I don't know if you have ducky draws where the ducks float around and you pick a duck and you might win a prize or not, but you pay to pick a duck. And then the third one is I've even tried where I've had literature about the Grange, handouts and stuff like that. And I encourage people to get involved and donate for various projects. In not one of these scenarios have I hit my $1,000 goal. What am I doing wrong? You know, I just got done telling you about the power of the cookie, but that cookie is not helping me right now. This is when you got to think bigger. What are some things that you can do that's outside of the box? Here's the thing that I love the most to do. So even as I was writing this example down, Beth Westbrook's mind was going a million miles a minute. And at the same time, as I was walking around the kitchen thinking about this dilemma, I stepped on my nephew's Lego. Not only did it hurt, but all of a sudden I thought, well, what if I was in the booth and I had bags of Legos, where the white Legos are $1 each, the red Legos are $5, the blue ones are 10. Get them to buy Legos and start building something right in front of me and talk about what the Grange is building. I think people would enjoy being engaged in an activity where not only do they see visually that they're building something, but they're hearing that they're building something. Now, will that make my $5,000 goal or $1,000 goal? I don't know. But I thought of something that I had never tried before. And so sometimes thinking bigger is even better. And sometimes when you start to feel success, don't settle for $1,000. Say, what is it going to take for me to raise $2,500? And brainstorm those ideas. What works? What do people connect with? What's really popular? I'm always reaching out to people. One of the things that you might even want to think about, whether it's on the local level, the state level, or even the national level, have a quarterly Zoom meeting where you get together and you talk about, hey, this has worked for me. Hey, I'm stuck here. Who's got a really good idea I can try? Or, the negatives. This is where I am stuck. Because I think sometimes, just like me, you get locked into a cycle of thinking and you need to branch out and think big. And remember that if somewhere along the way you hear no, I always think no stands for new opportunities, and you got to learn to pivot. I'm going to tie up my end of the evening with one last story, and then I'll open it for questions again. When I first came to the Vasculitis Foundation in 2018, they were a very small nonprofit that had been started by volunteers, had just worked up to having a couple of people as staff, but had no idea how to do fundraising. But they had a loyal group of donors that gave every year, whether it was $25, $100, without even asking them. They were getting money in because they valued the mission of the organization. Well, fast forward to the year 2020 and the pandemic hit. And everybody was scrambling in terms of what to do. I came up with a brilliant idea. To this day, I still think it's brilliant, even though we ended up losing money on it. That's not the moral of the story, people. It's the big idea. And that was, we needed to learn how to use Zoom quickly if we were going to engage our community. We needed to learn how to take donations online, which we had never done before. We needed to learn how to make them feel like they were still connected in a world where they were starting to disconnect and worry about their lives and their loved ones. So I had this great idea. Why don't we have a pajama party on Zoom where we all sit around in our pajamas? I know a few people who can entertain them, and we had members of our community that were willing to step up and share their talents. I reached out to national companies and asked them to support it. I had no goal and I had no specific way of how I was going to get it other than to tell them I'm going to have a pajama party. I ended up raising $10,000 against my own good judgment. The whole project, including all the technology, cost us a little over $25,000. But do you want to know what good came out of that? We inherited 100 new donors who, ever since the pajama party, now give regularly to the Vasculitis Foundation. What was a big idea that was poorly executed, but caused people to feel passionate about something, especially during a difficult time, ultimately led to a greater good. So I want to leave you tonight thinking about the power of the cookie, the ability to transition from no, to learn to adapt and to pivot, to don't be afraid to reach out and ask for help and say, these are my stumbling blocks. And finally, don't forget those people who help you when you ask them. Stay in touch with them. Let them know that they continue to be important to you. I know I've covered a lot. I've told a lot of stories. Please, please give us your feedback. Tell us what you want to hear going forward. Again, my email is beth.westbrook.cnps. And you are, oh, thank you, Phil. You are great. Thank you so much. Because again, if I didn't answer your question tonight, or if after this webinar you think of something else you want to ask me, please reach out. I guarantee you within a day or two, you will hear from me, even if it's that I'm working to find the answer for you.
Beth, while
I
we're
think
writing this down, there was a question dropped in the chat that asked, can you help identify some of the best online donation collecting sites?
Ooh, that's tough. And you know where that gets tough, Phil? Because they range in price. So depending on where your budget's at, it may constrict where you can go or enhance where you can go. I would, that's a really good question, Phil. If they would let me take a day, I'll put together a list of what I think are some of the best donation places, ranging from, there's a couple that are even free, but they're very limited in how much they can do for you, to some that are really big, but have a nonprofit component to it that you can engage at a much, much lower cost. So rather than time, very good, Heidi, Zelle or Venmo are a great place to start.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Neil, wait, Phil, let me answer Neil's question. Neil has one of the best questions. Can you pull Neil's question up for me, Phil?
Yes. I don't know if I can share it, but it says, what do you think about online raffles?
So yes, so the problem with online raffles is it's really difficult to do them. Even if you could constrain your online raffle to a single state, There are restrictions state by state and how you can do that and whether you need a license to pull it off. The challenge then becomes if somebody is solicited to buy a raffle ticket or purchases the raffle ticket in another state, you then have to adhere to their rules and regulations. So online raffles become, in my world, a bit of a nightmare. There's always that old adage of it's easier to beg for forgiveness than ask for permission. In this case, you do not want to have to beg for forgiveness. You do not want to get caught. So be very careful if you decide to go down that road to make sure you're looking into what your state regulations are about that.
There's another question up here that I missed earlier that said, how have you stayed in contact with all of the donors to keep them engaged? So I'm guessing this goes back to your pajama party story, but
Exactly. So I'm fortunate. In the position I'm in now, we have a very significant software program called Salesforce. And every donation goes into that platform. And I have my own personal dashboard. So what you get out of these platforms is really what you put into them. And every time I get a donation, and I work with the woman who actually does the entering of donations, I tag them with a follow-up. So if I know, for instance, what day Chris's birthday is, I will take it with that so that when it comes popping up that day, I'll send Chris a card or a little email wishing her a happy birthday. If I tag it with, let's say I get a sponsorship for an event and it's in October, maybe in February or March, I may tag it with saying, reach out to Mr. Kennedy. Thank him for his support, let him know what you're working on right now, and remind him that something's coming up in the future. But if you don't have that, if you feel like you're capable of just a spreadsheet, say in Google or in Microsoft, you can connect that to your calendar for reminders and do that. Again, you're not going to connect with every single donor, but if you discipline yourself to keeping that cachet in touch, sometimes it's just a blanket email to everyone. I'm just touching base. I want you to know we're kicking off all of our brochures in Spanish. And thanks to you and your generosity, it's possible that we are able to get this into some of our rural communities where Spanish is a dominant language. Something like that. I may not be talking to Chris directly, but Chris will know that thanks to her donation, something's finally happening. So, and I'm more than happy to brainstorm other ways that you can keep in touch with your donors.
sure. There was one here that just wanted clarification on donations under $250. Can donors still write those checks to the local Grange and use them for a tax deduction?
Yes. And that is a tricky.
Sorry, I'm sorry to interject. I didn't realize I was allowed to speak into this. No, they can't. They don't meet the tax deductibility criteria for tax deductible donations because they're 501c8s and 10s, not 3s. So no, donations to them are not tax deductible and they're going to have to go through their foundation if they want the tax deduction. Sorry, didn't realize I could talk.
The only thing that I will say about that is the IRS will still recognize a check or a credit card receipt as a deduction under $250. If they can show that it was a straight deduction and not to purchase a ticket to an event or a raffle ticket or something like that.
Beth, there's another question here. How do you suggest approaching individual donors in the community?
I guess that's one where it really depends on the donor, because that one is going to really heavily need a relationship, a sense of trust between two people. I've never had much success reaching out to someone and in the very first conversation, ask them for financial support. But I have been able to find ways to meet people where they're at and build the relationship to the point I can make an ask. And here's an example here in Shenandoah County. I joined the Chamber of Commerce because I knew there were a lot of local businesses there. I went to their activities and their meetings, and here in Shenandoah County, they even have a subgroup that meets nonprofit groups within the county. So I go to their meetings and I meet people, and in my mind, as I get to know them and they get to know me, I think, oh, this person would be a good person to reach out and ask for a donation. And that's when I will say, Mr. Smith, would it be possible for us to set up a lunch or a meeting where I can talk about what I'm working on with the Grange? And maybe there's some way we can work together on a project. Once you get to know that person and that person gets to know you, it makes it easier. Now, I've also worked in the world where we send out letters. We send out letters asking for support. And I will honestly say, in many cases, I don't even know the person on the other end. When I worked at the free clinic here in Shenandoah County, we were able to send a letter of support to every mailbox in the county. But the post office, the United States Postal Service, has very strict requirements in how you can do that. But it's not very personal, because the letter has to be consistent to every household. It has to say the exact same thing. It cannot even change from Dear Miss Ham to Phil to Miss Bear. It can say Dear Friends. Quite often that's what I write, Dear Friends. And you can do that. The success rate on those letters I have found to be less than 1% of return. So the major expense to me is generally labor, time, and then the printing cost and assembly of the letters. But sometimes that's how you connect with individuals. And again, you never know who's on the receiving end. And then that person can be somebody who you can build a relationship with. Does that help?
Yeah, I think that's great.
Okay.
Then
How about one more question, Phil,
Yep.
and then I was going to turn it over to Nona. Is that okay?
Sure thing. So
Okay.
the last question then that we'll take for tonight, feel free people to please go ahead and drop your questions in the chat. I'll be able to download the whole chat afterwards to get to Beth so we can answer more of your questions. But the last one that we'll ask for tonight says, what is the best way to word a donation letter when you have to go through a foundation?
Let me think about that one for a minute. Historically, I tend to be more. So let me step back. In many respects, it depends on what I'm asking for, because of my style of fundraising, I'm a storyteller. I like to draw people in by telling a story, by letting them know, even if it's at the foundation level, that they are making real impact in someone's life and in the life of people in their community. So I like to start out. The opening paragraph is really stating the purpose of why I'm writing. The second paragraph, I tend to tell a personal story, something that tugs at the heartstrings, or the reason why I would like them to support it. The third paragraph, I generally follow up with some facts and figures. I want them to know not only are they helping the human experience, but there are real data driven behind it. There's real reasons why I'm asking and why I'm asking this dollar amount. And then I generally close the letter by stating, could we meet to follow up? Could you let me know what next steps are? I try to leave with an actionable statement, something, what will be the next step to this letter? It doesn't end with the letter. And then finally, I like to close all my letters, whether it's a foundation request, a sponsorship, a request of an individual, or a thank you note with a PS. And in that PS, I end with the most positive thing happening in my organization right now, here in the moment. Do you know today 5 more children will have lunches at school because of the support we can raise? Please join us. Something positive that's actually happening. So they leave knowing that they're making a significant difference.
Great. Thank you, Beth. Do you want me to toss it over to Nona now?
Yeah, why don't you toss it over to Nona now?
Okay, give me 1 second here. Okay, I would now like to introduce Nona Bear. Nona is a patient rights and health advocate, and she is also a board member of the Vasculitis Foundation, was a 2022 Champion of Rural America from the National Grange, and is just a wonderful all-around person. So Nona, I'm gonna toss it to you for some follow-up here.
There, I was muted. I think you muted me, Phil.
I did.
But many have done that. Phil, it's part of the. I had planned to say something else, but Beth did just such a remarkable job, and I want to tell something really quickly about Beth. Beth, 2 years ago, Beth and I, at about 7 a.m. on a Sunday morning, were working on a proposal for a large grant from a company. And when we hung up, I thought she was asking, quite honestly, I thought she was asking for $100,000. Beth got $800,000. I just want to point out that she is a miracle worker, and she does not only write big and think big, she delivers big. And it was such a powerful object lesson for me. It is the reason why she is absolutely the best person I know. I had also talked, there are 2 things though that I just want to mention. Many of you will be staffing booths at fairs. Please consider, for your state Grange or your local Grange, a calendar of events that you're going to be having at local Granges, the state Grange, for the rest of the year. Make some and copy them to hand out, because all of the wonderful things you do, from a Christmas party to a trim the tree for people who don't have one, up to the pancake breakfast, are not necessarily things that people know about. And if you have a sheet to say, thank you for stopping by our booth, here's some activities we have for the rest of the year, please come by and see what we're about. It may be a good way to bring some new people to you. And And the other thing, which is equally important, and I saw that many people in the Grange that I have talked about this idea to are on this phone. So I'm sorry, you can plug your ears so you don't have to hear it again. Develop a brag sheet for your Grange. Every single person in this event tonight has a Grange that has done some remarkable things. Each year, put together 2 sentences about each one, get it down to a phrase so that if you're ever trapped in an elevator, which I once was with a head astronaut of the United States, and he said, "What do you do?" I had a long list of things to say, and it made me fully able to get them all out in four stops, which I wouldn't let the man get off the elevator until I had finished at the bottom. But I had a 4-stop brag sheet. Those 2 things will help you publicize your Grange. Publicizing the Grange does get your incredibly valuable work out to people who may not otherwise hear it. And maybe somebody will show up for a pancake breakfast. But more importantly, building the ties to people by showing the willingness to share what you are already doing is a really good first step. And I hope that Beth will come back and talk some more about this, because she is also the queen of telling a story in a way that makes people want to hear more and do more. Thank you so much. And I'll just leave it by saying, be sure to send in your address so you can get your thank you.
Thank you,
So-
Nona.
And I just want to jump in, Phil, really quick, because again, once a fundraiser, always a fundraiser. I try never to miss an opportunity. Nona, I love that idea about the calendar, but you're going to have to forgive me, because I would encourage everyone on this calendar, list ways they can become involved, whether it's becoming a member, whether it's inviting a member of the Grange to come speak at their company or their business, whether it's creating something that you can do together, or making a small donation to keep things moving forward. Anytime I have print material, I consider it real estate to engage people and get involved. So that's my last hint for tonight. Phil, Chris, Nona, Burton, thank you so much. And everybody tonight, thank you for letting me be a small part of what you do. And please know I'm here as a resource if you should need me. So thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you, Beth. We're going to finish tonight with a few words from National Grange President Chris Hamp. So Chris, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Phil. And on behalf of the National Grange and all of us, Beth, our thanks to you for your time this evening. And I know that as we talked last week, it sounds like we're going to be able to get your advice and experience and expertise to help us as we move forward and have something spin out of tonight. But the takeaways, I think, for tonight, for me anyway, were you repeatedly use the word passion. I think that is what we do best, and have that conversation, show that passion. The other piece is thinking big, right? I mean, that's another piece of this, is to not just settle for the $25 gift basket, but to think big and to begin that conversation, to engage. I think that's another part of that. So if there's 3 takeaways for me this evening, it's the passion, it's the thinking big, and it's the engagement. It's how do we continue that conversation? So I know there were several questions here about utilizing the foundation. The National Grange Foundation does serve as a pass-through for Granges around the country. We've done that for years. We're continuing to do that. If you'd like to know how to do that, you can reach out to, and we can put the National Grange Foundation board email in the chat, maybe, Phil, that ngfb@grange.org. is, and that'll get to the National Grange Foundation Board. And we would be happy to get you the documentation on the what we do to get you set up with that, and all the details. But again, thank you to everybody that was on tonight. I hope that this was a great start, and to begin that conversation in your Granges at home, and then kind of whetted the appetite for what's next. And I see Beth, Nona, Phil, everybody that's on, I see this start of this new approaches, new ideas, that this is the first of a series, right? That we continue to do these. We look at what we need, what local Granges are asking for, what members are asking for, and we do this for Grange Strong, right? We start using that Grange as a verb and working toward Grange Strong, and I think that new approaches, new ideas is a perfect way to do it. So again, thank you everybody for your time this evening. Please share. Please let folks know that this is available. Phil will get the details out for how to find it after the fact. And Phil, thanks to you and your team for making it roll smooth for the last hour. And we'll see you on the next one.